Hi, everybody. I'm David Robin, a photographer and member of APA Los Angeles Board of Directors. I'm also on the National Advocacy Committee for APA National. Welcome and thank you for joining us today to kick off our 10th annual APA LA Off the Clock photo competition. Today I'm speaking and having a conversation with this year's honored Off the Clock jurist, Rebecca Morse. She's the curator of the Wallis Annenberg Photo Department of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA. I want to also thank our event sponsors, Sammy's Camera, of course, Reclaimed Frames, and Castex. They're wonderful folks. Please frequent their businesses. They've been great support to APA throughout the years. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you a little bit of a primer on APA. APA is a not-for-profit association celebrating our 40th year. We're in 9 cities nationally. Our mission has always been to educate, promote, advocate, and build community. We're created by photographers for photographers, and we are inclusive of all emerging photographers as well as seasoned pros. We're an all-volunteer organization, and members are always invited to participate and engage in all of our activities. If you're not a member, please consider joining the community. Your voice is important, and we are only as strong as our community. And if you are a member, thank you very much for your support. Member advantages, for those of you who aren't aware, we have a lot of event discounts for some of our events are behind paywalls, so that's important. Members only portfolio views, we do those at least twice a year. Those are amazing. There's amazing reviewers, and it's a great chance for you all, as members, to meet with people that might hire you and show them your work. Competition discounts, such as Off the Clock. Sponsor discounts with Apple, Sammy's, Castex, Icon, and Think Tank. Our Apple discount is amazing. Very few organizations offer an Apple discount. We have a wonderful one. In fact, the computer I'm using today was bought using our Apple discount. Hire an APA Pro is on our website. That's a wonderful resource for clients to find you. And as a pro level member, you have a page in our annual source book, which goes to influences within our industry at ad agencies and so forth. Please remember to stay informed and visit our website. You could sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Instagram, and check out our YouTube channel, where you could take advantage of APA original online content with popular, informative, and inspiring programming. A little bit about our 10th annual Off the Clock 2021. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years. If those of you who haven't entered before, this is a unique opportunity to show your personal work. It's not your commercial work, which normally is what we show, but this is a chance to actually show work that you come from your heart. And this is a unique opportunity. There's not a lot of competitions like that in our industry. Not to mention, you get to be viewed by the world, and here we have the curator of one of the most respected institutions in the country. There are no categories, no content criteria, just your best, beautiful personal imagery. And while COVID has created a little bit of a snafu in how we do things, Off the Clock is it's a little different, but it's still just as inspiring and engaging as it has been through the past few years. For those of you who don't know, here's how it works. Rebecca will view all of your submissions and will choose 100 of her favorites. Those winners' work will be shared to the industry through a beautiful printed design catalog sent to influencers in the advertising, publishing, fine art, entertainment, and graphics industry, and shared through our website through the rest of the world. We have an online gallery that lives for a number of years. Now this year, we have a unique Best in Show category where Rebecca will choose 3 of her favorite images, and the winners of the Best in Show will have a one-on-one 20-minute opportunity for a portfolio review with Rebecca Morse, and that's pretty amazing, unheard of. Custom framing also of your winning image by Reclaimed Frames here in LA, and an in-depth feature on our website, which circulates throughout our network nationally and internationally. Call for entries is open now. It opened yesterday, so you guys are probably the first to really know about it. So the link is in our chat, should be in our chat shortly. Patty will make sure it's in chat. Enter early and enter often. A little housekeeping before we get started. This is a conversation, while it is a conversation between Rebecca and I, It's most importantly a conversation with all of you viewers and participants today in this conversation. We want your questions. We're excited to get your questions and answer them. We will be trying to get to all of them, but most likely we won't. And we'll try to get to them later, maybe offline if possible, if you leave your email address. Keep in mind to make sure your questions are in the question area and not in the chat so we don't miss them. All right, let me tell you guys a little bit about Rebecca Morse if you don't know. She's, as I mentioned, the curator of the Wallis Annenberg Photography Department at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, the largest art museum in the Western United States. She was previously associate curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, that's MoCA. Since joining LACMA in 2013, Morse has created inspired exhibitions of work by Larry Sultan, Thomas Joshua Cooper, and Sarah Charlesworth. Her upcoming projects at LACMA include works by Barbara Kruger and Objects of Desire, Photography in the Language of Advertising, which we'll talk about a little later in our talk. With her broad experience in the fine art and museum world, as well as a deep knowledge of photography's roots, Morse has singular and invaluable perspective on the medium of photography and its evolving role in contemporary art. APA Los Angeles is honored and humbled that Rebecca Morse will be joining us to curate Off the Clock 2021. Rebecca Morse is truly one of the great treasures and advocates of our medium. With that, please join me in welcoming Rebecca Morse today. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me, and hi to all of you out there. Thanks for joining us today.
So we're gonna do a little bit of trip through history for you, Rebecca, so that everyone gets to know you a little bit better. Being isolated, this is part of the community, is getting to meet each other. We don't get to meet each other in person anymore. So some of the questions I wanna present to you are about your background. To start out, I think it's most amazing, it seems to me anyway, not in the museum world myself, but that you were a photographer and a student of photography and have first and foremost a love of photography. So if you could talk a little bit about your background in photography and how you got started.
Yeah, thanks. I think that my interest in photography started early, actually in high school even, and for many years, many of my jobs were photo related. So when I was in high school, actually, I worked for a commercial photographer who photographed annual reports for the American Pharmaceutical Association, which is where my mother worked. And so he photographed aspirin and pills and all tabletop kind of stuff, right? And from him, actually, I learned how to develop 4x5 film because he shot it on 4x5. And that's sort of my early entry into my love of the darkroom, which I had for many years and really do still hold, although my access to a darkroom is quite limited now.
Yeah.
I went on and I studied art history, but I always had photography kind of along the side with me. And that means that when I was in undergrad, where I went to school, I went to SUNY Purchase, the State University of New York at Purchase, which is actually an art school. And I was able to take photography classes every semester. And that's the kind of school where their art classes were all day. So the morning you spent in the dark room or you spent painting, and then the afternoon was the crit. So that was pretty much like 9 to 5. And
Wow.
it was such that I could take art history the other days of the week, and then I could take one photo class a semester.
What a wonderful program.
I know, it's amazing. And I think there I kind of learned what, I do not really call myself an artist. I love art, and I became an art historian because I love to be around art. But in those early days, I definitely learned what it meant to make work, to talk about work, to critique it, and to be critiqued.
So you mentioned darkroom, which I guess I want to drill down just a little bit selfishly because I'm a lover of black and white. I'm a lover of the darkroom. I went into digital photography kicking and screaming. But now, of course, I don't have to breathe chemicals. But I wanted to talk to you about, or at least have you talk to us about traditional methods and is that something traditional methods? Let me put it this way: traditional methods and craft. Um, do you see that as something that is lost or something that is just transitioning now with digital photography?
I think that now more than ever, people make work in so many different ways. And, there have been spikes in return to more traditional methods over the years. I mean, I think of the 1970s in particular, where people were going back and, making tintypes and kind of looking at 19th century methods. And those things never disappear. They're always of interest. I think, chemical darkrooms are always a thrill for any of us working in the medium. And I think that there's often this desire to use your hands, and that's often what the darkroom allows. And people who are working digitally sometimes, think, oh, all I do is sit at the computer all day. What about the tangible nature of the medium? And I think what we see is, and what I've noticed sometimes is then therefore people move towards, oh, more kind of sculptural work, because
Hmm.
how can they make this piece do this thing that then uses their hands? So suffice it to say, I think that people are doing all kinds of different things, sometimes returning to black and white chemistry, sometimes straight digital, but anything goes. And I don't know that one is better than the other. And I don't ever think of it that way. I think when you're making an artwork, you decide what is the best way for this to be realized because of the content, because of your
Right.
ideas, because of how you're grappling with it.
Right.
Is
And that
it,
informs, excuse me. Yeah, that
is it a gels
informs.
and silver print, or is it, a unique photographic sculpture?
Right. It's
you know?
and to your point, I mean, I think the interesting part about, I guess, traditional methods, silver printing, platinum, palladium, is that each print you pulled was one of a kind,
Yeah.
and in the digital world, it's ones and zeros, and they could be identically duplicated. So that doesn't mean there isn't craft involved in both. It's just
Yes.
different. And you're absolutely right. The idea of in the old days of choosing the camera and the film based on what the subject matter needed. Um, Everything needed to feed the subject matter. So those choices, what lens and all that were important. And now we have options of how we go about it in digitally,
Yeah.
and the choices we make are informed by the subject matter. Absolutely. We do have a question. What from Jay Mendez? What can traditional photography techniques do that digital photography cannot? Do
Well,
you want to?
I think that one of the things that digital photography does is it makes decisions for you sometimes, which traditional black and white doesn't always do. Although, of course, we know that it does because black and white film makes decisions about, skin color
Right.
that, and so I think in either of those, getting into the mechanics of it is what really allows you to deal with those those structures. I mean, it might even be, I do know an artist working here in Los Angeles who is able to go into kind of the color decisions that digital photography makes on your behalf and play with it and change it. And so you might say, oh, I just have so much less control with digital. Well, maybe, but it's kind of a matter of also really understanding what it's doing and why it's doing these things on your behalf and getting in there. So um, both can do whatever you want them to do as long as you are engaged with the mechanics of what they
I
this
agree, and I think one of the wonderful components of digital photography and is that you can minutely adjust an image
mm-hmm.
down to the pixel. You can adjust an image. You traditionally dodging and burning in the darkroom was kind of a ham-handed way of fixing things or changing your priorities in the image. Where in digital photography now you can, like I said, go down to the pixel level and make decisions about your priorities, which is one of the reasons I have now fallen in love with digital photography, because some of the things in the darkroom were frustrating. I think that you couldn't be that minute in correcting things or getting things exactly how you want it, and each print would be different. So I wanted to sort of move maybe away from that now a little bit and talk about your path to becoming a curator. I know you began to speak about it, and then I sort of took you off path to craft and traditional methods. But I wanted to circle back about that path from photographer to curation, and it's an amazing thing for the folks, I'm sure, listeners to hear. Certainly amazing for me to hear, being in the business for so long, of hearing from a photographer who has a completely different career as a curator, still around photography. So if you could speak to that, it'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, after I graduated from college, I got a job working in New York City for a commercial photographer named Yasuomi Hashimura, who was a photographer of liquids and ice and also kind of tabletop things.
Specialist.
And very much so. And I I went to art school. I did not really know how to do what he was asking me to do. And so I was sort of training to be his first assistant. But as I did that, I kind of going back to what I was saying before, it was not really for me. I was really more of somebody interested in what other people made and not really the making necessarily. So that sent me to graduate school, where I studied the history of photography. And, the two were merged. And, that's actually kind of rare. There are not that many programs in the US that focus solely on photography. There's about 4 or 5 on the graduate level. And I ended up going to the University of Arizona in Tucson. And you might know that the Center for Creative Photography is on campus, started by Ansel Adams in the 70s. And so they had a really amazing archive and library. The library, which I worked in, was all photo books. And it was just amazing because you could walk through it, open up anything, a lot of rare books, a lot of magazines, a lot of things you'd never even heard of. And it was an incredible resource. And so I really was so excited to be there and be working in the medium and really talking to people who were drilling down on the history of photography, obviously from the 19th century to the present. And my second year, my final year, my advisor, Keith McElroy, invited Robert Heineken to do a seminar with us. He was a Los Angeles-based photographer here who started the program at UCLA. And a lot of his work, he'd been friends with Jim Enyart, who was the president of CCP, and a lot of his work he had gifted to the CCP. And so he was in the process of retiring, and he was invited to come to the center and meet with us graduate students while he literally went through every one of his works in CCP's collection. And so there we were.
Wow.
Captivated, by him being like, oh, I hadn't seen this in so long, and oh, this is what I did, and this is what and really, and it was that I really got excited about the possibility of working with a living artist, and what could that mean? Because I had been like, oh, I really am interested in Edward Weston in Mexico City in 1920. But Edward Weston didn't talk anymore, and
yeah, he wasn't holding court anymore.
He was not, and I felt like this primary experience of working with an artist, coupled with history and what had been written about him, was really key. And I wrote my thesis on him, and I remember I said to him, "Got this idea. I want to run it by you, ask you what you think of it." And he said, that's not my job. That's actually yours. I'm here to talk to you about my work, but it's really up to you to make the assessments that are necessary. And so that was like doubly freeing, because as an art historian or a curator, you work with artists, you help them to kind of show their best work, but they are not always telling the entirety of the story. Otherwise, it's a self-published book. It is a collaboration between the curator and the artist.
So, and that's a really good point. I just wanted to pause right there, because I think the idea of thinking about photography is I teach, and a lot of my students, one of the first questions I ask them is, who inspires you? And so many times, at least first year students are unable to answer that question. Um, it's really important, and you're driving that point home. It's really important to think about photography, and you were put on the spot to do so and embraced it. And I think the idea of not only seeing what's gone before, understanding the context of your work within that, and understanding what you want to say in photography, or in your case, understanding what the artist is trying to say in context with history and in contemporary art. It's so important, and I think we'll touch on later about photo books, because I think we're both lovers of photo books.
Yeah.
But you know, we could geek out on this, but I definitely think that was an important point that you learned by force, but then embraced it. The idea of like, okay, it's your job to figure this out and think about photography. So I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, but from a background of an understanding of the medium,
Yep.
really, and
Yep.
how it played a role, has played a role. So after that, I actually I got married, and my husband and I moved to Cincinnati, where he went to graduate school in painting. So he's
Oh,
a
wow.
painter.
Two artists?
So we have a lot of lively conversations about photography versus painting. And I worked for a commercial photographer in Cincinnati, because those are my jobs along the years. And actually, it was kind of amazing. Any of you who might have worked in the Midwest, we did circulars for department stores. And because we were in Cincinnati, we had a huge warehouse space. So we would house all the products that we photographed. And we were also still photographing 4x5 and literally changing out the seamless paper, every week for whatever season it was. 4 months ahead, and, red for Christmas and pink for Easter, with the same toilet bowl brush in front of it. So anyway, worked there. And we did that for 2 years while my husband went to school, and then we moved to Los Angeles. And I did not get a job at a commercial studio. I actually got a job working at MoCA as a curatorial assistant. So I had for a long time been interested in the museum. And actually, as a young person, I also had an internship at the Smithsonian. So I was thinking about that, and what could that mean? And it was a time before everybody knew the word curator, and I really only barely knew what kind of a job that was. But I started to work there, and I really loved it. And there was an incredible collection and an incredible group of people working there, and small staff, 5 or 6 curators. And it's contemporary art, so there were not departments. It was just, it was defined as post-war. And so I was able to use this history of photography as my base, but I worked on all kinds of shows: painting, sculpture, photography. And as a result, I have I think, an expanded view of photography and what photography can be, and its relationship to the other mediums, and the way that people work, and people who might be painters are painting from photographs, and people who are sculptors are hanging things on photographs, and people who call themselves photographers are painting on their photos. So that it's not one isolated medium, that's actually very broad. And it was with that idea, interestingly enough, that I came to LACMA, which does have departments. And I did say for a while, I would love then to really hone into a department of photography and bring kind of this expanded view, but also think about the 19th century and also think about today.
So LACMA, now that you've segged into LACMA has quite an extensive collection. And I would be interested in understanding from you, because as a curator, you have to figure out how to contextualize that collection. So if you could talk a little bit about your approach to the collection at LACMA, and maybe if you can, the philosophy of LACMA around that. At some point, we're going to move forward into the new LACMA, the new evolution of LACMA, which is coming, and we're very excited about. But for now, I just want to get a beat on that, the idea of this extensive collection. Where do you even start to curate from that?
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are 20,000 photographs in LACMA's collection, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And many of them are small, but now it's very big. So there's a range. The museum opened in 1910 in Exposition Park, and as early as 1923 is when we bought our first photograph. So we were actually not one of these institutions that said we don't think photography is an art form. We're not going to buy any of it. Photography was a part of LACMA's collection from its earliest days. And in fact, the museum hosted some really early pictorialist salons, one of which Edward Weston was involved in. We bought some very early Edward Westons right around the time that he made them, in the early 30s up to the 40s. So I think that's actually very much in the spirit of the institution. We did in the 1980s, in 1982, at the same time that the Getty did, create a photography department. And that was kind of a way of staking claim about the medium. The museum now has 13 departments, and some of them are geographic, some of them are medium-based, some of them are time-based. So they do all kinds of different things. And some of them also collect photography because Art of the Middle East and the Japanese department are also interested in photography. So we do, as we know, photography is a very democratic medium. It's also a multiple. And so it can navigate all these different things very easily. It's just the nature of the medium.
What is when you said time-based? What did you mean by that? Just to clarify.
Like modern is a department.
Oh, okay, got it. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and contemporary is its own department. Okay. And of course we are, photography spans both of those readily and easily. So that's kind of the makeup of the museum. But so when the department was established, we began to collect in earnest. And then when Robert Sobiasic, who all of you may know, he was an important curator of the department from the 90s. And he really put a focus on experimental photography. And so we have a really great kind of early days, and then this really amazing experimental collection. And then you all also might know the Marjorie and Leonard Vernon collection, which came into to LACMA's collection in 2008. And with that brought some really incredible historical work.
And that was through the Wallis Annenberg endowment, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which brings in the name Wallis Annenberg.
Supported that major acquisition, and in turn, our department is named in her honor for having done that. Really made it possible for us to acquire works that we never would be able to. Marjorie and Leonard Vernon began collecting photography in the mid-1970s in Los Angeles, and when a time when it was really not that highly valued. And they were able to make some amazing purchases, and the fruits of their labor and their love has a resting place at LACMA, which we're really appreciative.
And that's wonderful that they live in such an esteemed institution too, because so many times people's collections languish unseen, and that's always sad in the art world when people don't get to see the art.
Totally. And we obviously were able to care for it, we're able to catalog it, digitize it,
big part of it,
blend it. So all the things that really are the reasons for these collections coming into institutions is for the care, which, by the way, just a side note, that is the root of the word curator, is actually to care for. It is not necessarily to organize and to put things together. It's actually to care for a collection.
Interesting. I should have looked up that word. Now I will. Yeah, I mean that because we always think of curators as like organizing exhibitions or but you're the caretaker of the work as well. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, that answers the question about the Wallis Annenberg piece. I know that the Annenbergs have been great supporters of the museum for many years, and how many was it, like 3,500 images or something like that they
Yes,
3,500 prints,
exactly.
which is a huge collection, and it goes all the way back to Weston and earlier.
It goes to the 19th century. Yeah, it
Wow,
goes.
wow,
It's yeah,
amazing, amazing.
yeah.
So with the, I guess there was a couple of questions I want to ask, but I'm going to move them because they would be out of context now.
Okay.
Let me see if there's anything coming in regarding, not yet. So yeah. So the current evolution of contemporary photography, as we touched on earlier, how do you see your role as curator now that we know that it's caring for, but also how do you see your role as curator as such an influential institution with contemporary work coming in? I mean, we all know about, as you mentioned, the epochs of the different time frames that work was created, but now with contemporary work coming in from all angles, what is photography is a big question. What constitutes photography? Because people are able to mix media much easier now with digital. So I'm just curious about how you see your role in dealing with contemporary photography, is mitigating all the channels it's coming in on.
Right. Well, one of the great things about my job is that I do a lot of studio visits with artists who live in Southern California, and there are lots of you all.
But each one is special.
Each one is, yes. And I mean, historically, just the photo programs through universities and through community colleges here in California have created just an amazing group of artists. We say, like, in the 80s, people went to school here and then they moved to New York. But now people come here to go to school, they stay here, or they move here from elsewhere, like I did. And so when we're not in our houses 24 hours, I am out doing studio visits, and I do probably about 30 a year.
Wow.
So that's a lot. That's, three,
But that's got to be fun. I mean,
almost 3 a month kind of a thing.
But it's got to be fun. Is that a fun part of your job?
Great.
It's because
I love it.
You get in other
so
people's
fun.
worlds, right? You're like, yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like that is my job as the kind of really the contemporary curator of photography, to know what people are doing, to talk to them, and to understand kind of what's happening in the medium. And we do make acquisitions of those individuals to come into the museum. So that is also being kind of charted as that work is being made. And my job is just to know as much as I possibly can and to see as much as I can. I went from this contemporary museum where we were supposed to know everything about all media all over the world to photography. And now I think I've been kind of also focused more so on California. But I think that this place is so rich and
Yes.
so there's nothing quite like it, I think.
A lot of history here. A lot of history
here, both in Northern and Southern California. A lot of experimentation and really an idea that everything is valid. There are no rules about what is good, what isn't, what you can and can't do. And I think as somebody who grew up on the East Coast, I know a lot about rules.
Right.
What's okay and what's not.
Right.
That's not the case here, and it's exciting.
I mean, you just think about the San Francisco Institute, the San Francisco Art Institute. I mean, Diego Rivera taught there. I mean, to me, and then you look in Oakland in the East Bay, there was a huge art movement that came out of that, Diebenkorn and so forth. So the idea that you've got this incredible lushness in California, not diminishing the lushness throughout the world, but just that California specifically, there, maybe it was the weather, I don't know. People came from back east, and discovered the light here. But it is interesting, and that's such a fascinating part of your job, it sounds to me. I'm slightly jealous, just a little jelly, that you get to you get to go to other people's studios and spend time in their studios and learn about their art and explore, and that's your job. How wonderful. So here's an area I want to go into now that I know is near and dear to your heart, and we're all excited that those of us that live in Los Angeles, is LACMA's new home. For those of you who don't live in Los Angeles, the LACMA physical plant has pretty much been leveled, and they're building a 21st, 22nd, 23rd century art museum. This doesn't happen that much in the world anymore. And Rebecca is there while this is happening. And I want to, with no spoiler alerts, I want you to talk about your excitement of the revitalization of the mission to facilitate dialogue and collaboration between departments and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible, actually. If for those of you who have been in your car, who do live here and drive down Wilshire Boulevard and see really kind of an empty space from which this Peter Zumthor building is going to emerge. And yes, it is going to cross over Wilshire Boulevard and take up part of the parking lot in Spalding as well. And as a curator at LACMA right now, I'm in conversation with the other curators, and we are embarking on something that has not happened, which is to install the collection together thematically. And for those of you who were visitors, you knew that there were departments were installed in permanent collection galleries, and you might go and see what was happening in the art of the Middle East or in European painting and sculpture. You might remember that photo didn't have permanent collection galleries for some years, but earlier it did. So we thought that is not really how artwork is being understood today in these kind of areas. Could we think about reaching out and create more thematic exhibitions with all media, all years?
Wonderful.
Whatever we want to do. So that's really, really exciting. The building itself is on one floor. So you will move through it, and it has a series of kind of interior galleries, exterior galleries, and has windows kind of going all around it. So it will be lit. And we have all kinds of amazing ideas, and it's so fun to work with all my colleagues who have such amazing skill set, knowledge of their expertise. And lucky for us, photography plays an important role in so many of these ideas, because it not only speaks to what it is a picture of, the content specifically, but also the way that it was made, the material, formal ideas about light, ideas about spirituality. Like, there's so many possibilities. So that is what we are currently working on. That's really a major bright spot as we look towards our 2024 opening.
2024? Is that when? Yeah. Is that the goal?
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean,
look, on track and on budget, so we're looking good.
Clearly not. Not a public works project. But I have to say, I mean, looking at the drawings and models, the thing is, first of all, it looks like an Earthship. It's inspiring in its design, and rethinking how a museum works, and that art isn't created in a vacuum. It's created by everything that is visualized has an effect on any particular medium. So the idea that you're mashing it up is really a modern way of looking at art, and I think it's going to be really exciting. Also, especially for young artists that maybe get stuck in their medium and forget that there's other mediums that could influence them. So I wanted to talk about Objects of Desire, which is it's opening in July. That's the plan. July 2022. Yeah. So not this July.
No.
It'll be in the parking lot.
No, it's in BCAM. Actually, it's not in the Zumthor building.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So what's fascinating about that is most of our members are commercial photographers. Most of our members, I would say most of our members are somewhat involved with advertising or commercial imagery. And this is about that in a way. And I'm not going to spoil what you're going to be talking about, but the objects of desire, I'm going to read a little bit about it for the folks who haven't read about it. This is me reading to you. Objects of desire, photography in the language of advertising, traces the artistic manipulation of advertising, the most powerful mainstream visual language. Since the 1970s, creative innovations led to dramatic shifts in the possibilities of photography as artistic expression, as photo-based artists reworked advertising strategies to challenge the increased commodification of daily life, and later to appropriate the command of these images have over the viewer and consumer. By exploiting advertising's visual vocabulary and adopting its sites and formats, and through re-photography appropriation and simulation, artists create a shared photographic language that puts the onus on the viewer to determine what exactly these pictures are asking of us. Participating artists include Lucas Blaylock, Victor Bergen, Joanne Callis, Sarah Charlesworth, Sarah Quinar, Victoria Fu, Elan Lasry, some of these I'm mispronouncing, please correct me, Rue Etheridge, Robert Heineken, Barbara Kruger, Carter Mull, Pat O'Neill, Kim Schoen, Sandy Skulgland, and Hank Willis Thomas, among others. So with that mouthful, from the caretaker's standpoint, please talk to us about the impetus of this show, the scope and focus, and your thoughts behind the show, if that would be.
Yeah, well, as you've heard a tiny bit about my background, I did work a little bit in commercial sphere. And so I have a little knowledge of that world. And I've always been interested in photography in particular, how the commercial world and the fine art world, how they've negotiated each other. And that's really from the inside, from the practitioners, more so even than the people looking from the outside. And ideas around that, how they have, in my opinion, changed. And this really came about initially when I was looking at Elad Lasry's work. And he's an artist who lives here in Los Angeles and essentially makes still life photographs, which, still life is actually more of a medium artistically in painting. Like, not that many people make art photo still lifes, because those are mostly product photographs. And he makes them based on advertisements that he has seen. And they're really hopped up on color, and they are made the same size as the original advertisement, but he's changed things out. I mean, it's not a one-to-one, but it's like, he might put lipsticks on a plinth or some strange bananas, and he's done it on colored seamless, and then also made a frame around it to match the color. And I thought, okay, now what is going on here, and what are these, and what are they asking me to do? What are they asking me to buy? Because they feel like they're manipulating me in the way a commercial image does. And so that got me to kind of think, like, what's happening now? How is it that artists are using this language of color and still life that is often been reserved for another domain of photography? So I started to kind of do the research, and looking back, really at the 70s when I think it began, where artists were really critical of this move of advertising on us, like attacking us. They say, like, oh my gosh, a person sees like 1,000 advertisements every day, like in 1970. And you think, that's nothing. I mean,
yeah, that's kid stuff. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
That was before the interwebs.
Totally. But people were mad, and they were really, artwork was critical of that. The show takes its title from a series by Sarah Charlesworth from 1986 called Objects of Desire, in which she cut out magazine images, not really ones you would know or recognize, but all different kinds, models, things, masks. She cut them out, and she physically put them against a piece of seamless, photographed them, sent them to the lab where they were processed and printed very big and shiny. They were on Cibachrome. And everybody was like, oh, disgusting. Like, how can you make that and think that that's an artwork? That is like not what art is about. And remember at this time, like photographers were fighting to be considered artists. And how did you do it? Well, you made an 8x10 black and white gelatin silver print because that's art.
Right.
And all this other
Right.
stuff is not. It's
Right.
just like offensive. And so that juxtaposed with, 30 years later, what Alad Lasry is making, unabashedly.
Which is, it's funny though, but it
is it.
Right, but it's funny because Warhol gave us permission to do that, but only in the silkscreen world, the
right.
soup can.
That's
Photographers were not allowed to do that. I mean, that was
exactly.
right. I mean, that's so the idea that in other medium we were given permission because of Warhol. Of course, Warhol was not popular in a lot of circles too, but now speaking of your show, now you're showing this stuff in context that people just completely reevaluating the stuff that we're bombarded with. So but anyway, that was sort of on my mind.
True
yeah.
Because, and in that the early pop is it's silkscreen, but early on it's, painted.
Right.
It's translated into a handmade painting. So that's what made it okay.
Yeah.
Not read photography.
Because that's art. That was art.
That's
right.
art.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
So that's kind of the impetus for the show. The show divides then into themes. I started to think about it chronologically, kind of from the description that I'm telling you, but I thought there are actually so many themes that overlap that it's more fun to show a 70s work next to a work that was made in 2010. So we have product photography, color, the magazine as a site or as a material, also stock photography, which is really fun, and then humor. And that's sort of how it goes thematically. But another interesting thing is a lot of this work is from LACMA's collection. So come to find out, it was kind of been a through line idea of the collection, maybe from Sobiasic to the present. And I've made some other acquisitions for the collection as well. So it also goes along with kind of what we're thinking about in terms of repositioning and showing what LACMA's collection is telling us. Because some of this work was purchased at the time of it being made, so it was really relevant to the moment. So I think that's kind of an important.
Well, we're in a time, and I think this is an important show for our audience. I can't wait for it because it is a time when there is introspection happening. First of all, we're all at home. Photographers, artists are all at home. They're creating art from found objects around their home. And they also, we have the opportunity for introspection. And what are we doing with our art? Why are we shooting what we're shooting? And this is when this show comes about in 2022. Hopefully we're allowed to leave our homes and we'll be able to sort of contextualize our thought process during lockdown around our artwork and see, okay, well, I was looking at my work too, thinking, is this grotesque? Is this something that speaks to where we are now in the world of trying not to manipulate, but having a message? We're selling a product, but are we not being responsible in selling the product? So maybe I'm going too deep on this. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but I think, or maybe it's TMI. I like the idea of the show at the time. It just seems to be happening. Will be a time when I think we're going to really be ready for it, especially as speaking from an artist standpoint, speaking as a photographer. So, God, look at the time already. This is crazy. So I've got about 4 hours of questions. No, I'm seeing, first of all, are there any questions? I'm not seeing, there's no new, please folks, if you have questions, now's the time. Rebecca is an amazing resource. So please, because I'm going to just keep asking. So I wanted to sort of, maybe this is speed questions now, just quick question. Okay. Do you personally collect photography?
I don't.
Okay.
I actually, because my husband's a painter, we often trade. And so we that's sort of a little thing. We do have a little collection kind of from gifts and from trades, but And his father was a painter also, so we have a
Hmm.
lot of that work too. So we're kind of surrounded by things that are made by people who we know and who we're friends with. So
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and that's good. Trading is great. We don't my wife and I, obviously, we love photography. We collect either by trade or, and I think trading with other artists is a great way to build a collection. But the other thing is, my collection, or our collection, is in photo books. I mean,
yeah,
I love photo books. The tactile idea, first of all, photography. It's nice to see it on a screen, but in my background, photography was on the wall or tactile, something you could touch. So books serve that purpose for me. Do you collect photo books? Do you?
I do a little bit, and I think actually what I should say about collecting photos and books is that except for now, I go to
Mhm.
the office every day where I am next to
Right,
a
right.
collection of 20,000 photographs and a photo library that is amazing.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I spend so much time with those objects and those resources. I love it. I'm actually missing it so much being home. And the point of that is that I don't actually have them in my personal collection because I have them in these amazing institutional collections that I have the privilege of using and being
Yeah, your
next to.
collection is one of the largest collections in the country, so it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be personally owned. I'm going to
But
jump to some
yeah.
go ahead. No, go
No, but
ahead.
the time spent with books is unmatched and there's really nothing like it.
Yeah, I agree. And
Yeah.
my wife and I have moved quite a bit, so it's been very expensive to move books because they're heavy. But nevertheless, here we are. So I wanted to jump to some questions from our audience. This is a long-winded one. Let me see if I can get to the gist. Eesh. Uh, okay, so current photography, here I go. Current photography at major galleries seems to stay away from social justice or major issues like homelessness. I do black and white portraits of those living on our streets. The humanity we see in these people needs to be seen as awareness is so important. The last major show in LA was early 2000 at Central Library on Grand. In conjunction with National Homeless Coalition in Washington, D.C., why do the most important venues in SoCal ignore this art? Should museums mount exhibitions to document evolving social conditions, pandemic, masks, vaccine distribution, patients' works, etc.? Loaded question.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. We have not put forward a show that is definitely that is specifically about that work, and I do think it is very important. I wonder about sometimes the venues for more documentary photography tend to be periodicals. It's true, or kind of venues maybe more like the Central Library, and I don't that's just kind of the case. I feel like in maybe in the museum world, we are more apt to show work in which the maker is embedded in that world or that life. And I think that maybe doesn't happen so much, obviously, with the homeless population,
Mm-hmm.
but that I think it's true. Like, I mean, I sometimes go back to Larry Clark or Danny Lyon, this kind of idea of the embedded artist photographing what's around them because they're living in that. I think that tends to be what is put on the walls more so than kind of more of a documentary approach.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean
Yeah.
that's forever. It just seems like that is true. You make a
Yeah,
very good point.
and I think we're playing catch up. I think
Yeah.
a lot of, especially large institutions, it takes a while, unfortunately. But I'm not speaking for you, and I'm not speaking for LACMA, but
Hmm.
just in my experience with large institutions, it takes a while for things to matriculate and happen. And unfortunately, I wish we could all move quicker. APA is moving quicker to play catch up also on diversity and inclusion. We're doing a good job, but we're small. We're not LACMA.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that doesn't excuse it, but I know that you're working on it. I know that the museum it's on the radar and it will happen. I have a question from Stephanie Shee. What do you think the current status is of BIPOC representation in terms of photography and collections? Are many of these historical collections from a particular point of view, or is there a drive for more diverse point of view? That's a very good question.
Yes, absolutely. There
Yeah.
is very much a drive for a more diverse point of view, and it happens on all levels. It happens on the curatorial level, on directorship, and on art makers. And we are very much um, cognizant and working as best we can to really open up the field as much as possible. It is an ongoing effort, and I think that you will see it when you come back to the museum.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, and it is an interesting time, and everyone's trying to figure out how to speak about it without cliche, and also certain people are the better to speak about it than we are. Just saying that tenderly. What themes? This is from Natcha Kent. What themes, medium expansions, or specific projects are exciting you currently?
Ah, well, actually, David mentioned that we will be hosting a Barbara Kruger show. Well, it's actually a major. It's not really a retrospective because a lot of artists don't really go for that term. But how about survey? And it will take up a whole floor of BCAM, and so we have the elevator going through there, and then a whole floor of her work, and it includes some early vinyl pieces and some really amazing full room installations and some new video works that play on her early vinyls, and they are super exciting, and she is been amazing. You she has her finger on the pulse in a way that is so exciting to be around. So she will likely make a few new pieces that will reflect the current state of the world. So that's exactly a year from now, March 22.
It's so hard. It's so hard to keep track. It's like,
what month is it? Anyway,
well,
so
we
that's
lost a year. We lost a whole year. So yeah, where
yeah.
are we? Yeah. So 2022, right? Is
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
on the schedule? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So a year from this upcoming month. Yeah.
So Jay Mendez asked, I think you already answered it, but we'll post it again. Are collectors open to both digital and traditional images? I think you've covered that, but I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
There's no
And in fact,
distinction anymore, right? There's no real distinction other than, like there wasn't a distinction necessarily between what camera you used in the old days.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we would might not even know. I mean, we try to when we acquire work, we try to capture that information just for the file
Yeah.
because as much as somebody can tell us about it, usually it's output more so than the making. But yeah,
So,
anything. Pinhole.
and that yeah, it's great. Yeah, Pinhole, right? Pinhole Digital. I mean, actually I know someone that made a Pinhole Digital camera. It actually is a wonderful time to be an artist, to be a photographer, and also probably to be a curator because there's so many ways art can be created now. Man, it's 1:59, 1:58. It's amazing how fast this has gone. So there are a few more questions on here. I'll try to get to them online afterwards. If somebody leaves their email, we could do that. Or leaves it with Patty, that would be great in chat. That would be wonderful. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, David. And I want to say to all of you, I'm super excited to see your work, and it's really a pleasure to be invited to participate and to be the curator of this upcoming exhibition. So thank you.
Yay, I have goosebumps. We're so honored. Thank you for everyone that attended today. This is being recorded, so we will be posting it online at some point and announcing it. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors again. And I want to do a shout out to our director, Patty Silverstein, who is behind the scenes. She's running the show from behind the scenes. Without her, this thing wouldn't work at all. And all of our volunteers, specifically Hugh Kretschmer, who is helping me. He helped me locate Rebecca. And Karsten Steinhausen, who is our wonderful graphic designer, also a photographer, who does all of our graphics, and Hannah Benet, who also handles all of our social media. I'm sure I'm missing people, but again, we're all volunteers on this, so I want to shout out to everybody. Enter Off the Clock, link is in the chat, or go to our website and find it. Join APA. Be heard. Your livelihood depends on it. Reach out to any of us through APA. You can find the board members on our APA LA website. We're here for you and your success. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, and join APA. Bye-bye.